Republic and Germany from 1918 to 1945. By the way, this video is specifically targeted for IGCSE history, but you guys could watch this for any other exams or just for knowledge and fun. And it's focusing on the Weimar Republic, Stresemann, and Hitler. And please do forgive me about my pronunciation mistakes in the video. Let's get started then. So the timeline of the events that we'll be covering in this video. 1918 was the end of World War I. A year later, the creation of the Weimar Republic and the Treaty of Versailles. 1922 was the economic disaster with hyperinflation. 23 was with the Weimar Republic under Stresemann. And in 1929, the Great Depression hit, and it started the rise of Hitler and the Nazis. And of course, in 1933, Hitler becomes Chancellor, and as we all know, in 1939, World War II begins. So part 1, 1914 to 18 on World War I. Some background info. 1914, prior to World War I, the Germans were leading very prosperous lives. They were proud of themselves, and they were under the rule of the Kaiser, which is kind of like a king, sort of like a dictator. All right. So in 1918 was the end of World War I, and Germany was basically destroyed, completely destroyed. And the people of Germany were surviving on scraps, and they had a completely destroyed army, and there was a flu epidemic killing thousands of people. And the chaos followed in autumn 1918 when everybody became evident that they had lost. And the Allies offered peace to Germany in exchange for their democracy. So since the Kaiser was a dictator, basically a dictator, not exactly, he was a Kaiser, he was a king, but he abdicates. Abdicates just means just like going off the throne, like resigning, on November 9th, 1918. And Herbert, which he was like basically the first German chancellor. I'll go in detail in him on the next few slides, but basically he signs the armistice on November 11th, 1918. So impacts on of the First World War on Germany by 1918, you can split them into three key sections. Social impacts, which is basically the effect on people, economic, money, and political, the government and politics. So some social impacts. So basically, in short, the social impacts deepened divisions in German society. There were huge wealth gaps between the rich and the poor. The workers were unhappy about restrictions placed on their earnings during the war because they had to work for low earnings during the war because they had to manufacture a lot of stuff so they could win the war, right? And the factory workers only got rich, but the workers had restrictions on their earnings, so they earned less, but the factory owners got rich. And the owners made vast fortunes. And the soldiers were disillusioned returning from war. Disillusion basically means like something is not as good as you thought to be. So you're planning a vacation to like the Maldives and you get there, but it's not as good as you thought. So you're disappointed. That's what the soldiers felt, disillusioned, returning from war. And the Germans were angry. Many Germans were angry because they lost the war. Waves of unrest, especially in cities, big cities such as Berlin, had lots of unrest. And cities like Berlin used to be disciplined. People used to follow orders. It used to be a nice, safe, and like, predictable city. But Germans were angry, so there was lots of unrest. So economic impacts. Basically, Germany was bankrupt. They spent all their money on the war and they were bankrupt. National income was a third of what it used to be prior to World War I in 1913. 600,000 widows and 2 million fatherless children by 1925, and the state was also spending, by 1925, a third of its budget on war pensions. Imagine a third of your budget is just going off to basically these people's salaries. By the way, pension is just basically the money paid once you retire by the government, but obviously these guys died, more or less. And food and resource shortages. 50% of milk and 60% of butter was produced compared to before the war levels. And cold due to fuel shortages. There was lots of fuel shortages, so 300,000 deaths and starvation and hypothermia in 1918. And the industrial production, factory production basically, was was 2/3 of what it had been prior to the war in 1913. Some political impacts. There was a revolution, basically the abdication of the Kaiser, as mentioned before. So the war stress led to revolution from October to November 1918. Nobody wanted to, basically these soldiers didn't want to continue the war anymore. So the Kaiser abdicated in revolution. there was a new unstable democratic republic. Many extremists attempted to take power. There was lots of fighting between the left and the right wing, so the left wing parties and the right wing groups, and many despised the new democratic leaders. And this is something called stabbed in the back, which we will cover in the following video. And there was a sense of betrayal, which we will also cover later on. Then, 1919, the creation of the Weimar Republic. This is where it starts to get a lot more interesting. The creation. In January 1919, Germany held free elections for their first time. Friedrich Ebert and his party, his Socialist Party, won by majority, and Ebert becomes the first president of the Weimar Republic. Some backstory of the Weimar Republic. The new government met in Weimar rather than Berlin, which was the capital, because even in February of 1919, Berlin was too dangerous. There was too many riots and stuff like that. So the success of the Weimar Republic depended on two key factors: its constitution and the German people. Would the German people support it? Would the constitution be good enough? So the constitution. Basic principles and laws of a nation. That's what a constitution is. It's basically like the original rules, what the country was made to be for. And it was designed, the Weimar Republic was designed to be as democratic as possible. It could possibly have been the most democratic country at the time. And it was basically the complete opposite of what it had been prior with the Kaiser. And to represent as many groups that made up the German society as possible, they used proportional representation, which is basically like, so you do a vote, right? If 5% of people vote for one group, then that group gets 5% of the power in the government. So basically there was a lot of governments, so it made it difficult to make decisions, as we will see later on. And no individual could gain too much power, so it was structured that way. And all Germans over 20 could vote, including women. And this is basically the main features of the Weimar Constitution, which was agreed by the National Assembly in July of 1919. So first of all, we had the German people. All adults could vote. Remember, you had to be over 20, but everyone, including women, could vote. And they all had equal rights. So the German people voted for the president. As we can see, he was elected every 7 years. And the president basically doesn't really do much. He just basically elects the chancellor, who is basically, he's appointed by the president, and he basically does the day-to-day like governing of the country. It's not really the president who does it. The president just appoints the chancellor, but it's mainly with the chancellor who actually does like the day-to-day governing. The Reichstag is like basically the house, the White House, not the White House, but like, the House of Congress, where the government works, and it used proportional representation. So parties got the same proportion of seats as their proportion of votes, as mentioned before. So the people voted for the president, who appointed the chancellor and the Reichstag, and the Reichstag makes the laws, and the people elect the people who go into the Reichstag. Now, the states kept their own governments, basically like the cities, like Alabama or California, kind of like the US, but Germany also has its own states. So the states could keep their own governments, obviously they had reduced powers, so the Reichstag was more powerful. And the national laws could overrule the state laws. Now, there was one important law in the Constitution. It's called the Article 48. I put a warning sign there because it's quite, it was quite dangerous. So Article 48 said in an emergency, he could make laws without going first to the Reichstag. So the president, more like the chancellor and the president could make laws without going through the Reichstag. So essentially, they could make whatever laws they wanted in the case of an emergency. However, the thing is, an emergency wasn't really decided. So they could just say, oh, there's a fire here, and there's an emergency, which this man, who we all know, ends up doing a couple of years later down in the road. So this is quite dangerous, as I showed by the sign here, and it's foreshadowing something that's going to happen with Article 48 and this man. So the strengths of the Weimar Constitution. It was a genuine democracy. Reichstag appointed government and made laws. And the Bill of Rights guaranteed every German citizen freedom of speech, religion, and equality under the law. Some weaknesses: proportional representation. So 5% of people vote for you, you get 5% of the seats in the Reichstag. So that would mean it's difficult to pass laws because there's a lot of different parties in the Reichstag, and weak and short-lived governments. And of course, Article 48, overused, weakened German confidence in democracy. Because once Article 48 was used, it's basically like the rule under the Kaiser. It's not really democracy anymore. And the people. This is the second thing that the Weimar Republic depended on and would decide its success. Would they accept the Weimar Republic and its constitution? And that it's a difficult question to answer. Some accepted it, but there was a lot of opposition from both the left and the right-wing parties. And that brings us to our next video, which will be on the opposition of the Republic, and from opposition from the left and right wing, challenges, hyperinflation, and the Weimar Republic under Stressman, and of course, the rise of the Nazis and the inevitable start of World War II. Thanks for watching this episode of Stu Plain, and if it did help you, please like and subscribe and share with your friends. Thanks for watching.